How to store yarn and manage your stash. Hi everyone, my name is Norman and today's video is all about the best way to store yarn for knitting and managing your stash. I will show you which system I have been successfully using in the past couple of years. I will talk about my mistakes you definitely do not want to repeat, and at the very end of this video I will also show you some rare yarn treasures from my stash close up. So let's dive right into it, but before, please do me a favor. If you like to scroll through the comments and read all the stories from other knitters as much as I do, then please comment right now how you are currently organizing your stash and where you live. Behind me and next to me, you probably already saw these boxes where I keep most of my stash. I often call myself a professional yarn hoarder and not a knitting blogger, but despite this fact, I almost never keep my yarn out in the open. I know these walls and cupboards full of yarn look super pretty and they kind of make you feel like you were living in a yarn shop, but I always keep my stash in these airtight boxes. So before we take a look inside, let's talk about the reasons behind this decision. First of all, this prevents any sorts of bugs like carpet beetles or moths to nest in your stash. They are stackable, so if you have a large stash, this makes things very easy to handle. Then, of course, they are transparent, so you can easily see what's inside. They are made out of plastic, so they are super light. It keeps your yarn out of harm's way. Think about cats, dogs, or children. Your yarn cannot get dusty, but just as important, it cannot produce any dust either. And since they are airtight, your yarn also cannot absorb any additional moisture, and this of course helps to prevent mold. I'll add a link to the description below in case you want to buy some of these boxes. I want to be honest with you, they are not the cheapest, but I'd warn you to store your yarn in simple boxes or even plastic bags because they will not be airtight and any bugs that want to get in will get in. Also, organic fibers attract humidity, and if it's not an airtight container, then what will happen is that it will soak up ambient moisture, and then when it gets warmer, the plastic will act like a hothouse, and this of course can lead to mold. What you can do, of course, is you can put smaller balls in these Ziploc bags and then put these bags into these boxes. Either way, let's take a closer look inside. So you will notice how I labeled all these boxes. So here we have alpaca yarn, cashmere, there's sock yarn, and so on. And this helps me finding the box I need very quickly. Inside the boxes, I really don't have a system. You can try to stack the skeins a bit more neatly, but once you move the boxes around, things will jumble around anyway, so I don't bother too much. But there are three things I would like to highlight. First of all, I always put a couple of these silica gel bags into each box. Germany is not a very humid country, but I still feel a bit safer with them. I think you can buy them, but I just collect them whenever I find one, when I bought, I don't know, some electronic gadget or so. Then you will see how all my yarns are labeled. So for yarn cakes, I will typically store the label at the center and actually roll the cake around it. Frequent viewers might know that I never do center pulls, but if you like to do that, then you can of course store the label here on the outside. And if I lost the label, then I will make sure to attach a little piece of paper so I never forget what kind of yarn this was, just the basic information. What you can also do is if the skein is getting too small, you can use a bit of tape and readjust the size of the label with it. And the third thing you will notice is how I use these hairpins to secure the tails. Especially if you have a lot of smaller half-used balls of yarn, the ends can very quickly become tangled, and this just helps to prevent a mess. You might also see that this is a wild mix of balls, yarn cakes, skeins, and hanks, and quite honestly, I really don't believe it matters. While an industrially wound skein is probably the most breathable, in an airtight box it really doesn't matter. I don't unwind these hanks either, because that way I could always sell them later on, or trade them, or give them away in case I want to get rid of them. And I would say do whatever works for you. Yarn cakes are of course a bit easier to stack, and you can knit from them right away. If you are living in a place where moths are a problem, you might consider adding a bit of cedar or one of these lavender sticks to your boxes. I mean, these boxes are airtight, but you'd be amazed through which tiny little crevices the larva can crawl, especially, if a little bit of yarn gets caught here in between the lid. Also, you might consider putting the yarn into the freezer a couple of days before you add it to the stash. That way you will take care of any unnoticed blind passengers. Oh, and one more thing. I also use these boxes to store my finished objects. And if you think about it, it makes little sense to go above and beyond to protect your stash and then make all the mistakes with your finished projects that took hours upon hours to create on top of that. So, like winter wear I don't use during the summer months or so. Now, before I go on and show you how I organize the rest of my stash, I quickly wanted to remind you that producing all my tutorials and videos takes a lot of time and effort. Consider becoming a Patreon for as little as $5 to access special knitting tips and patterns. I always say it's a bit like an honesty box. My videos are for free, so everyone can learn this beautiful hobby, and those who can afford it help me produce more videos for everyone. Either way, another very important question is how I organize my stash, meaning how do I decide which yarn goes into which box? Well, quite frankly, I would say that pretty much boils down to your preferences, but also the size of your stash and your knitting habits. You might be tempted to organize things by yarn color, but other than looking pretty, it really doesn't make any sense, except you are only knitting with one yarn weight and material, or you have a super huge stash. Instead, I would think in terms of yarn substitution. So when you are looking for a yarn for a pattern, you don't ask yourself, where are my green yarns? You are probably searching for a specific yarn weight and fiber. A pattern typically doesn't call for a green yarn, but a superwash sock yarn. And if you were to organize your yarn by color and you don't have a green superwash sock yarn, then you would have to search through all the other boxes until you find that sock yarn in a different color. So I don't think that is very smart. I typically organize my yarn by fiber. So here is a bin full of alpaca yarn, or rather baby alpaca yarn. And here we have sheep wool, this is cashmere, and so on. And the reason why I do it like this is because it's much easier to determine the yarn weight than the fiber. And obviously I don't have that much yarn that I need a separate box for cashmere in fingering and cashmere in DK or so. And ultimately the yarn weight really doesn't, on the label, doesn't matter. You knit a swatch and see where it gets you anywhere. If you watch my video on how to get gauge, then you might probably already know how little I think of the yarn weight classification system, so popular in America. I would totally ignore it, well, personally. Now, there are some boxes where I store yarn by a certain company or dyer. For example, this here is a box full of Wollmeise yarn, and that's because I use this yarn for very specific projects, like all my little flowers and mushrooms, or where is it? Here is a box full of Riga sock yarn, which I use for most of my traditional Bavarian socks. And then when I want to start a new project, I open these boxes of wonder and see what I have. But that's obviously only makes sense because I have so much of it. And if you have a lot of sheep wool yarn, then you could of course do one box for fingering, one for DK, and one maybe for worsted. But as a rule of thumb, I would always start with the material, and then if you have enough to fill 2 boxes or more, then I would separate them by yarn weight, and then if you still have too much, then you could separate them by color. Next, I want to talk to you about long-term yarn storage. I mean, I put everything into these boxes, but where do I store these boxes? There are 2 things to consider. First of all, the most important thing is probably storing your yarn in a dark place. A lot of dyes lose their vibrance when exposed to direct sunlight for a prolonged time. And I guess this is just one more reason why these pretty shelves full of yarn are such a bad idea. In a yarn shop, it really doesn't matter because the yarn there doesn't have a long shelf life. But in your home, a skein could rest in the same place for half a decade or so. And the second thing you might consider is that it should be a dry place, so no damp cellar or so. These boxes here, they might be labeled as airtight, but I doubt they are 100% airtight, if you look at it long term, 2, 3, or 5 years. So if you ask me, heat doesn't really matter, but it should be a dry place and of course a clean and vermin-free place. I actually store my yarn in my cellar, but it's a very, very dry cellar. Now I also have a basket in my living room. This used to be an IKEA basket, but I refurbished it, where I store, my current work in progress and the yarn for immediate use. I don't have cats or children, so I don't need a closable project bag just when I travel. So most of my yarn is hidden away in the cellar, but a bit of it is always in my craft room and my living room. And I also have this little box here, and all my scrap yarn goes into it, and I keep it next to my desk. It's just full of scrap yarn, and I use the scrap yarn whenever, I need to knit a swatch to test a new idea or a new technique or whatever. So that's how I repurpose my scrap yarn. Another thing you might consider is cataloging your yarn. This can be done online or offline. If you are like me and you own a lot of yarn, then even labeling the boxes and having a nice system will only get you so far, especially when these boxes are stored in a different place. So what you can always do is you can start an Excel file or use an inventory app and add every single yarn that you own to that file. Ravelry, which I don't use for entirely personal reasons, also has an option to catalog your stash. So whenever you're looking for, fingering weight yarn for a new project, then you can open your catalog and see what you have and in which box you can find it. I would like to warn you here though. Any catalog is only as good as the one keeping it. So if you don't use it on a regular basis and add every purchase and delete all the yarn or mark every yarn that you used up, then it's kind of worthless. So ask yourself if you are that kind of person or not. I don't use one because I'm quite the impulsive knitter and shopper, and a badly kept stash catalog is probably worse than having none. Now, I promise you a close-up look at some of the treasures in my stash, and I keep my most expensive yarn here in this little box here, not in the safe yet, in this box here. So let's head over to my desk and take a close look. This here is the softest fiber in the world, vicuña yarn, or rather Paco vicuña yarn. I already published a full video on vicuña yarn. I'll link it to you up in here in case you want to catch up on this amazing fiber. And here we have a couple of skeins of Kivet, the incredibly soft downs of the musk ox. It comes from Greenland and it's such a wonderful, wonderful fiber, and I have it in these three gorgeous colors I want to use to knit a huge shawl. So let me know if you would love to see a full review of this incredible yarn. Next, I want to show you this wonderful, wonderful bison yarn. I haven't knitted with it yet because I'm still looking for an inspiration. I want it to be a shawl or a cowl or so, and I would love to pay homage to the cultures of the Great Plains. But so far, that's just a hazy idea and not a final pattern. Still, such an interesting fiber and actually quite soft. And here we have some ridiculously expensive guanaco yarn. This was a gift and it's just those two tiny skeins. It's wonderfully soft, but also a bit fuzzy. I don't know how well you can see this. So it's kind of waiting for the right kind of pattern, and until then it's there whenever I need something super soft to pat. Here at the very end, I want to use this opportunity to talk a little bit about the dangers of buying too much yarn. There is this famous acronym, SABLE, a stash acquired beyond life expectancy. And it means that a knitter has so much yarn that they could knit for every day for the rest of their lives and still not use up their stash. And the way I see it, this is a hobby and it hopefully brings you joy. And there is no denying that yarn can be comforting. It's soft, it's squishy, and it can be very beautiful to just look at. So I don't actually think it's wrong to indulge in buying a skein or two ever so often. If it brings you joy, why not? Others have fancy cars they don't really need, or expensive watches. Treating oneself ever so often is so important, and in my experience, especially mothers of larger families often forget that. Don't! You are worth it! Of course, some people have a no stash policy, meaning they only buy the yarn they need for their immediate project. But if you ask me, it's totally okay to have a beautiful skein here and there that's still waiting for the right kind of project. There are different kinds of people, and some people thrive when they have this clutter-free, minimalistic life, and others are collectors. I am one of them. If, on the other hand, you are considering to move to a new apartment because you need more storage space for your yarn, well, then we might need to have a talk. And I think part of the problem is that our society is so geared towards consumption that buying new stuff can become a habit you don't even question. Also, a lot of indie yarn dyers produce these limited editions where you have to be super quick or your shopping cart remains empty. Paired with 20% off here, but only for the next 48 hours, or get $20 off your next purchase, but only valid until the end of the month. And things like that, buying new yarn can quickly become a trap or addiction. And then you see the people on Instagram showing their stash, their new acquisition, or their beautiful craft room, and you go like, I want that as well. But question yourself. Why do you need it? Why do you need more yarn? And if you don't really have a good answer, you probably don't need it. And then turn this into your golden rule. Mine is, if I don't have a specific project in mind, I don't buy it. What I see so often is that people are destashing, meaning they bought too much yarn, realized they don't need it anymore, and then they used the super expensive indie dyed yarn for a simple stash busting project, or auction it off for charity for $1 and a dime and so. I mean, that's totally okay, but in most cases it would have been much better to not buy the yarn and use the money for something productive straight away. Either way, that's how to store yarn for knitting. Please like this video if you enjoyed watching, comment with your questions and your feedback, and of course don't forget to subscribe in case you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day. And don't buy too much yarn.